Hi everyone, this is Roger. We are about to see the second in a series of ancestral movies that Marian and I had worked on for a long time. But Marian was the producer. She did all the legwork to find out all the information. She narrated much of what you're going to see. I called her the producer. What a dedicated sister she was, for she was so excited in the production of this movie because she wanted you to see and hear the stories of our ancestors and their struggles and their hopes, their risks, and their dedication. Their love for each other was very evident to get through so much of what has happened in our history. And as you'll see in this movie, we will bring that to you as best we can. But right now, we're going to hear my voice as it was told at Marian's memorial just shortly after she died. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor Han, and thank you for coming to honor my sister Marian, for she loved you dearly. Marian gave her life caring for others and tutoring children with love and understanding. And as I ponder why she was taken so suddenly, I'm made aware of the tremendous impact she has made in each and every person she has touched during her life. And now, in her death, she has made a greater impact, and she has set the bar very high for all of us. I am reminded every day of her caring. I have sorrow, but Marian is joyful. I feel lost, but she has been found. I am lonely, but she is surrounded by love. I am wanting, but she is fulfilled. I am grieving, but she is singing. And I am heartbroken, but she is heart-filled. I love you, my dear sister and producer. I want to play for you a brief narration that Marian made during the process of making our movie called The Long Voyage. And in this narration, she is asking that my children and my grandchildren carry on this journey, for it has no end. And now I'd like to play that narration for you. Thank you.
The long voyage has no end, for it is you that continue it on.
Now, Marian had a great interest in a lot of things, and besides wanting us to carry on the long journey, she had a very musical, light side to her that enjoyed life. And one of the stories over the past few months came known to me the other day, and that is that while she was housing my son and daughter-in-law, David and Diane, and their child Megan, Marian would often play with Megan and dance with her to the sound of music. So I just want you to hear the sound of music.
My heart wants to beat like the wings of the bird that rise from the lake to the trees. My heart wants to sigh like a chime that flies from a church on a breeze. To laugh like a brook when it trips and falls over stones in its way. To sing through the night like a lark who is learning to pray. I go to the hills when my heart is low. I know I will hear what I've heard before. My heart will be blessed with the sound of music, and I'll sing once
So Marian's heart is truly now filled with the sound of music. And we should be joyful that she is where she always knew she was going, to God's heaven. I just want to tell you now about this location here at the Gray Funeral Home in Cranford. Right across from the parking lot where you probably parked tonight.
John Crane, our bloodline ancestor, the son of Stephen Crane, one of the first settlers to Elizabethtown in 1664, had the chance to make a great impact on this area and Cranford.
He built 2 mills on the Rollway River, one a grist mill and one a sawmill on either side of the river. These were important mills during the Revolutionary War, as they supplied grain, flour, and cornmeal to the troops. Marian would really feel good about being here and having us memorialize her at this location. Thank you for attending tonight, and thank you for being so close to Marian. She was very special to me, and I know she was very special to hear and to all of you who attended. Thank you so much for coming. Hi everybody, this is Roger. Marian and I would like to thank you for watching part 2 of the Long Voyage. We hope that you pay attention here because there'll be a short quiz at the end of this part 2. And the one with the lowest score in the quiz will win the prize of being the family ancestral historian. What a great job that is, folks. Good luck. So now let's take a few glimpses of what we're going to be showing you over the next period of time with all of the lines, but we're going to tell you about courageous, freedom-loving, industrious, creative, and adventurous people.
Welcome back, fellow voyagers. Are you ready to continue the journey? I hope so, for this journey is going to take you right down to your roots, right down into the foundation of our country. So that is why I want to tell you that Roger and Beverly and I are 10th generation Americans. That means that we have over 1,000 direct grandmothers and grandfathers. And if you are the 11th generation, you have over 2,000. And if you are the 12th generation, oh boy, you have over 4,000 grandmoms and grandpas. Oh, but don't all you get up and run for the door? We're not going to keep you that long. We just want you to meet some of these women and their ancestral families who married into the Bates line. So picture the Bates line as the trunk of a tree and the women as the limbs. Now these families lived right around us in Kenilworth and Union, Cranford, Westfield, Newark, and Elizabethtown. And by the time we finish this journey, you will be so proud of them. So let the journey begin with someone you already know, Phoebe Crane. Remember her, Grandpa's mom, the one who left him $1? Well, you know what? She had a rough start in her marriage. She married George Washington Bates II, you know, and she married the day after Christmas. And back then in Victorian times, it was just the beginning of having a tree in the house. And of course the tree only had candles. And during the ceremony, she was too close to the tree, and her veil caught on fire. So maybe that made her a little grumpy, I don't know. But she and her sisters are what I want to tell you about right now. This old house was on Garside Street in Newark. Mom said it was a house full of love. This is where Phoebe Crane's sisters lived. Lottie and Jenny, they were spinster ladies, and Aunt Grace Grandpa's sister lived there with them. So the Bates girls went there as often as they could, because these women were good bakers, and they even had second-hand clothing for the Bates girls. But most of all, the stories we heard were about the wonderful works of art and the music of the grand piano. There was a wonderful punch bowl, large, on the dining room table, hand-painted by Aunt Jenny with beautiful grapes. And then there was a beautiful painting by Lily Spencer, a famous artist of the day, of the Crane children in a farm scene. Bev and I tried to find that painting, but we even went to Washington, D.C., and we found one, this beautiful Lady in Blue, done by Lily Spencer. The Newark Museum also has several of her paintings. So this work of art must be in the hand of private collectors at this time. But these stories were passed down to us, and we felt like we knew these women. And I tell you this so that you might do the same with your children. Tell them stories of your family and of their stories that they told to you. Give your children roots as well as wings. And now I'm going to tell you about Jenny Crane. Our mom was named after Great Aunt Jenny, Jenny Baron Crane. Now, Great Aunt Jenny, when she was a little girl, she had an unfortunate accident and became blind in one eye, but that didn't dim her enthusiasm for life. She was trained and educated in the arts and became an avid china painter, and later a teacher of classical oil painting. Mom and Aunt Dorothy, as children, were entrusted by her to take baskets of china to the firing kiln to be fired. They were beautiful things, clover and dogwood and roses. And, of course, I have Mom's collection in the corner cabinet in the kitchen, and more in the cabinet in the back room. She earned her living by painting china, and received many orders. In fact, today they still can be found in estate sales. And much to Beverly's surprise, one day she went into an antique store in Cranford, which was so unusual for her to do. But she was drawn in there, and there was a wonderful collection of Great Aunt Jenny's china, which she purchased right away. What treasures they are to us because of all the stories we heard about them. Now, Great Aunt Jenny, she was Sunday school superintendent of the Park Street Chapel in Newark, and she told Bible stories to the children by drawing them as she spoke about them. The children were mesmerized. Later in life, during the Depression, she came upon hard times, and she had to sell all those beautiful treasures in order to support herself. She died at 86 in 1944 and is buried in Mount Pleasant Cemetery in Newark. Now, one more note of interest. In 2000, the year 2000, Ulysses Grant Dietz, curator of the Newark Museum, asked that I write a bio about Jenny and also donate some of her china pieces. And I did that. And now there's a lasting memorial there of Jenny Baron Crane. Now I'd like to tell you about Lizzie Crane. She didn't live in that house on Garside Street, but she had a big influence upon the Bates sisters. This is little Lizzie Crane. She would have loved to have played with Megan and Kara, only there would be one problem. You see, Lizzie could not hear, and she could not talk. She had to let her fingers do the talking for her. That was called sign language. But you know, Lizzie loved to play and smile. She loved to draw pictures. Here's a little picture of a kitty cat she drew. But best of all, Lizzie loved to give hugs. And my mommy, who knew her, always said Lizzie was a little love bug. Here is Lizzie, all grown up. Now, she got married 3 times, you know. She married men that could not hear and could not talk. One of them, his father owned the Henderson Seed Company in Newark. The others I don't know much about, but they all went to heaven before she did. So, that's the story. Now I'd like you to meet Charlotte Crane. She lived in that big old house on Garside Street as well. She was affectionately known as Aunt Lottie, and she loved to entertain the Bates girls with stories and games and wonderful tea parties, outdoor tea parties. Now she was a beautiful young woman and highly educated. Her father, David W. Crane, gave her the privilege of going on the grand tour of Europe. And that was an honor given mostly to young men. And the young people would travel to all the classical cities and study art and literature. Lottie, we know, studied art in Munich, Germany. And it was there that this lithograph was taken of her. That was a very special way of transferring images. Now, our grandpa always told a story of how when he was a little boy, he got to see Lottie off on the grand tour, and he watched her walk up the gangplank and wave to him. So now Roger would like to tell you about the grand tour and that steamship, the Olympia.
Before I get started on the grand tour, I'd like to bring little Lizzie Crane back into the picture for a moment. She wrote the following note, and she also drew and painted that little picture of the pansies, and the note reads, "Pansies are for thoughts, to say thou with childlike faith, but lean on him whose dearest name is love. To Lottie." Signed, Sarah Elizabeth Crane. Now, she wrote this to Lottie before her trip to the grand tour, and I thought it was a beautiful note. And thank you very much for taking this time out. And here we go with the grand tour. Lottie Crane was a very faithful risk-taker, for she was going on a journey of her lifetime, which was most afforded to men of her day. It was off track for any woman to try to take this journey. The risks were great, and as she left New York Harbor on the Olympia, a ship that was in transition from sail to steam, it had both. The ship carried about 700 passengers and went to Newfoundland, actually the city of St. John, and from there crossed the North Atlantic with icebergs and hazards galore. She relied upon very strong technical people to get there, the captain, the navigator, for they did not have the instruments of today. They had to use the stars and a compass. She arrived in Liverpool, England, after about a 3 to 4 week journey on the high seas. And then when she got there, my goodness, she didn't have reservations. She didn't have a telephone like we do. She didn't have a computer. She had her own skill as a woman who was going to take the step forward. She had to hire a coachman. And here's a picture of a horse-drawn carriage overnight sleeper coach, which she most likely had to use at various times during this trip. She left Liverpool and went through London and got to the English Channel, where she left on a ship for Calais, France, and from Calais, France, continued her journey, probably getting another coachman to train stations throughout Europe. And she had to stay long periods of time in Munich and most likely Italy, where she had to rent for months or longer in order to complete her education. Marian and I thought she was going only to enhance her love of the arts at the Munich School of Arts, a universally known place to go if you were an aspiring artist. And here's a photo of that, a very nostalgic place. From Munich, she probably went through to Italy and Bologna. And most likely, we believe right now, she went to the University of Bologna, the oldest university in the world, where she most likely studied Italian and astronomy. The reason I bring you this is because Marian passed away in October of 2010, and a few days after she passed, I received a call from Centenary College in Hackensack, New Jersey, and the woman told me that she had an inquiry from Marian about a month ago asking if Lottie Crane ever taught at Centenary College. The woman said that after extensive investigation they found documents that said she did, and here is one of those documents on the screen now. I discover from these documents that Lottie taught French, Italian, and astronomy. What an amazing turnaround from this grand tour. Well, I can tell you more, but I am certainly proud to have descended from this Crane line of faithful risk-takers. Lottie lived 76 years, dying in 1927. God bless her.
Don't fall asleep yet. We're really going to have some interesting things. Now here is David W. Crane. Of course you know he's the father of the Crane sisters and the husband of Sarah Elizabeth Burgoa. But he was also a master builder of the city of Newark. He built many of the public buildings there and was well known for his generosity. But I want him to be known to you because of the rich heritage he brings us. You see, his third great-grandfather on his father's side and his third great-grandfather on his mother's side were both original settlers of Elizabethtown, New Jersey. Now there were 80 Elizabethtown associates who purchased under the Dutch from the Sagamore Indians over 500,000 acres of land, stretching from the Raritan to the Passaic rivers. Now the land was apportioned by lottery, and some of it stretched to the spring fields of Elizabethtown, and some to the west fields, and some to Connecticut Farms, which is present-day Kenilworth, Union, and Cranford. Well, they had plowed their fields and planted their crops and were building their mills on the river. And harvest had not come when the English took over the Dutch colony. And now their land did not belong to them, and they were required to pay rent to the English. Well, this stirred up a rebellion that lasted almost 80 years. And our ancestors, Stephen Crane and Joseph Sayre, were involved in that rebellion, for they were men of action. In fact, they helped with pulling off the clapboards from the house of the English proprietor in Elizabethtown. Their sons got involved, and their grandsons, John and Daniel Crane, also helped disrupt an illegal meeting in Newark of the new governor. And they broke the judge's sword into pieces. And Joseph Sayre's son, Daniel, he went to Newark and took the keys from the prison, from the sheriff, along with others, and liberated Joseph Parmenter, who had been put in it for not paying the quit rent. So you see, these people were strong and brave, and in your vein runs their blood. So if you have anything fiery in you, you know it must be from them. Now that young fellow, John Crane, who helped disrupt the first meeting of the new English governor, he was a man of action and a great worker, for it was he who built the first sawmill along the Rawway River in Cranford. And on the opposite side of the river, he built a grist mill. In fact, the town of Cranford is named after him. At one time it was called Cranesville, and later Cranes Ford, for the ford was the dam that he had to build in order to operate the mills. And his old homestead was probably in the location of the present-day Gray's funeral parlor. Now Roger has done a lot of research, and he wants to tell you now about that grist mill and how it operated. So enjoy.
Hey, you guys are staying awake? Well, Marian has told you about John Crane. And John Crane built these two mills in Cranford, New Jersey, right on the Rawway River. And some of you today still live very close to those mills. And there's a great story about mills and how they came about. They actually were invented thousands of years ago. And in 1720, John Crane built his first mill on the Rawway River. And I'd just like to tell you a little bit about the structure of the mills and why they were built and what was the family life in that area as those mills were producing flour and grit and cornmeal for consumption. Going back in history, grist mills were powered by hand, by human strength. Then by animals. They used animals to pull the mills around to produce flour and cornmeal and alike materials. But John Crane in 1720 used a water wheel. And what we're going to show you, and is what you're probably seeing right now, is an animation of how a water wheel worked. There were many types of water wheels, but water wheels had to be made according to the energy that was available. Now, the energy that was available in the Rawway River was not the best. It wasn't coming down out of the mountains at a high rate. So what they had to do is first build a small dam and then build a water chute alongside the banks of the river so that they could install a fairly large wheel that had troughs in the wheel. And in the days of John Crane, they used what they call a breast chute water wheel. That's where the water comes about halfway up the wheel and then goes into the trough and pulls the wheel around at a steady rate. There were much more efficient mills in use at the time, which were top chute mills, but the water flow in the Royal River wasn't deep enough, nor was it coming out of the mountains at the rate they needed to use a top chute mill. Let's take a look now at the key components of a grist mill. Of course, the river, the dam, and the water raceway into the large water wheel. Then we have the shaft and the gears and the spindle, up to 2 millstones, one permanently installed and one that's grinding or turning. And then we want to take the feed hopper, where they pour these various grains in to produce flour and cornmeal and alike materials. So let's take a look now, and I'll be quiet. John Crane produced flour and cornmeal for consumption and sale, and also produced it for our soldiers of the Revolutionary War, the American soldiers. They would come and pick this up on a weekly basis and take it to a baking factory where they would bake this flour and make it into bread for the troops. There's so much history on this subject that we don't have enough time to cover even a smidgen of it. But one of the most important factors in those days was that the farmers, the local farmers who grew corn and other grains, drove this with their families to the mills in Cranford. And they would take it by the wagon load, by horse. And the family would come and gather and unload the grains at the mill, and they would also just gather and have a picnic at the edge of the river, and the kids would be playing, and they would have a great time as a family waiting for this grain and corn to be processed and to get their money that they needed to buy other things for themselves. But if you'd like to go online and do some more research on this, please do, because it's very interesting and there's so much more. So thank you for listening. Well, you heard about Stephen Crane from England, who was the original settler of Elizabethtown, New Jersey in 1664. You heard about both his sons, John and Daniel, a little bit, and now you'll hear about the second Stephen Crane in the line that we're going to report to you, and he is Daniel's son. Stephen Crane, born in 1709 and died in 1780. He became the mayor of Elizabeth and the sheriff of Essex County. He was a New Jersey legislator and a senator. But most notably, he was appointed as a member of the First Continental Congress. And in doing so, he had responsibility for mapping out the America that these patriots desired to have. Our Crane line had many branches because they had 9 to 14 kids, each of these families, and the branches spread out very rapidly. And amongst these branches were other Stephen Cranes and other famous people. We'll start off with Stephen Crane, the author of The Red Badge of Courage. And here are some of the books that he wrote and became famous mainly for The Red Badge of Courage. He died at a young age. Charles Henry Crane, who became Brigadier General and Surgeon General of the United States in 1882 and 1883. And then we have Ichabod Crane, who was in the United States Marine Corps and served on board the USS United States. And then fought in the War of 1812 and died as an active duty participant. And we have William Crane, born in Elizabethtown, New Jersey, and became commander and captain of the USS Crane. These four people that descended from the Crane line have the same ancestral DNA as we do. Amazing stuff. Hi everybody, let's recap our bloodline ancestry. Starting in the upper left-hand corner, we have the original settler to Elizabethtown, New Jersey, Stephen Crane. And then from Stephen, his two sons, John and Daniel, we descend from both of them. From John, we have Mathis Crane, who was the mayor of Elizabeth under the British. And then from Daniel, we have Stephen Crane, the more famous patriot who was a member of the First Continental Congress, mayor of the Elizabeth, senator, sheriff. He was just about everything in his day. And then from Mathis Crane, we descend from his son, Jacob Crane, who married the daughter of Stephen Crane. And her name is, of course, Phoebe Crane. Now we look at page 2. Top left-hand corner, Jacob Crane, the son of the previous Jacob Crane, who married Sarah Sayre.
Sayreville, New Jersey was named in the honor of the Sayre family.
Jacob and Sarah had a David Crane, who is a master builder for the city of Newark, New Jersey. He married Sarah Bergaw. And they had Phoebe Crane. Phoebe Crane comes popping up a lot, I know. Well, this Phoebe Crane was the wife of George W. Bates. And she was the one who left my grandpa $1. And then we come down from there to my grandfather, David W. Bates, the scholar and patriot as well, and great family member, who married Ellen Eames. And we'll get into those three women later in another bloodline, because we are also descendants from Sarah Sayre, Sarah Bergaw, and Ellen Eames.
Now we go to page 3 with my mom, Jenny Marian Crane Schroppe, who married my dad, Franklin Schroppe of Westfield, New Jersey. And they had first Beverly Bailey, then my brother, Franklin Charles Schroppe, born 1929 and died in 1936 from kidney failure. And then we have our beloved Marian, the producer of this movie, born in 1932 and died in 2010. Then myself, born in 1940, and I had 3 sons, Scott, David, John. Scott had Jennifer and Buddy. David had Megan, and John had Kira. And Beverly had, of course, Stephen and Robert. And now we can see that this line has much history. And we're at the point where now one of you will take over this job and be the family historian. Thank you.
Okay, all of you very smart people, stand up if you know what a Huguenot is. Oh, okay, spit it out, spit it out. Oh, I guess I'll have to tell you. It means a French Protestant. But the root meaning of the French word, now listen up now, you know you're going to be tested. It means persons who walk at night. Yes, walk at night. That was probably because that was the only safe time for a Huguenot to walk out and find a place to worship. For over 100 years, they had worshipped in the dark caves and under the blue vault of the heavens. For you see, they were called heretics by the church, and the kings considered them a threat and encouraged their extermination. But I will not tell you some of the horror stories they went through. I'll just tell you about La Rochelle, France, because that is where our first Huguenot ancestor was born. His name was Brocard. Now in 1628, Cardinal Richelieu came with 30,000 men and blockaded that city. They even built a seawall so that the people could not import or export food or goods. The city was besieged for 14 months, and at the end of that time, out of 27,000 people, only 5,000 were left due to casualty or disease or famine. Over this period of time, hundreds of thousands of Huguenots fled to other countries, Holland, Germany, Ireland, England. And this paralyzed France, for you see, the Huguenots were prosperous merchants. They were into manufacturing. They were furniture makers, silversmiths, tanners. They were craftsmen of all kinds, more or less the middle class of France. And once they left, France was paralyzed and bankrupt. And it was this that sowed the seeds for the French Revolution, when there was only the extremely rich and the extremely poor. Now I believe our ancestor fled to Holland, the most tolerant country in Europe. And eventually, Holland established a colony, and many Huguenots fled there, and that's where our ancestor came, to the wonderful city of New Amsterdam, which all you smart people should already know. That is the city of New York. Okay, sit up and listen. This is an important one. When our French ancestor, Brocard, came to New Amsterdam in the New World, he had 6 sons. Now 5 of them changed their name, anglicized it, to Brokaw, and 1, Isaac, anglicized it to Bragaw. That's through whom we come. But that's not the important thing I want to tell you. You see, they all married Dutch girls, whose names I can't even pronounce. So I want to tell you about your Dutch heritage. I want to tell you about that little country of Holland. For in the 1600s, when the Pilgrims were coming over, and our ancestor Edward Bates was coming over on the Griffin, and our French Huguenots were being persecuted in France. Do you know what was happening there in Holland, in that little country? It was becoming the melting pot of all of Europe. It was Europe's financial center. In the 1600s, Holland gave us Rembrandt, Vermeer, the microscope, the tulip, the stock exchange. You see, those Dutch seafaring people were very money-minded for sure, but they were also very tolerant. And they believed in freedom of worship without persecution. All of Europe, you had to be but one religion, but in Holland you could be anything you wanted to be. And so it became a haven for the refugees and exiles of Europe. Now Holland frowned upon the monarchies, for they were a bit of a republic, you might say. They believed in hard work, personal modesty, simplicity of dress, and they believed power belonged to those who made things happen. They even had a university in Leiden, where scholars throughout Europe came because they were free to study and to investigate and to teach chemistry and botany and medicine. For the Dutch were open to intellectual inquiry, and they believed in the natural law of right and wrong. But the wonderful thing I want to tell you about them is that they invented the modern notion of home as a place of privacy and intimacy. They even divided the home up into rooms, which never happened before. And those rooms, you know what they did? They decorated them. They were the first to decorate with rugs and porcelain and Delft tile. They made little dollhouse replicas of their homes. They put paintings on the walls and maps. They invented coziness. But they also did something unheard of before. They actually loved their children. They coddled them and hugged them. They believed that the children were not supposed to be held on so tight a rein. They allowed them to exercise their childishness. They said, we do not want to burden their fragile nature with heavy things. So you see, they were a very special people. And I would say in our lingo of today, they were regular guys. All right, you regular guys, answer me this question. Who was here first? The English with the Pilgrims up in Massachusetts? Or could it have been the Dutch? Well, I know you said Dutch because that's the truth. They didn't have a colony, not until the 1620s, but they were here, all because of a wonderful explorer named Henry Hudson. And Roger is going to tell you a little bit about Henry Hudson and the half moon.
Well, Marian, you gave me quite a task to research this explorer, Henry Hudson. And I did. Henry Hudson was a sea captain who made 4 voyages in an attempt to discover a northern route between Europe and Asia, the so-called Northwest Passage. Although he never found such a passage, he sailed further north than any previous explorer. He explored 3 North American waterways that were named for him: the Hudson River, the Hudson Bay, and the Hudson Strait. Little is known about his life prior to these voyages, but he did come from a wealthy, well-educated family. He was educated in astronomy, and he was educated in cartography and seamanship. So, in 1607, the Muscovy Company, an English trading firm, hired Hudson to find a northern sea route to Asia. Hudson set out from England in a ship called the Hopewell with his young son John and a crew of 10 men. He sailed northeast along the coast of Greenland and reached Spitsbergen, which is about 700 miles from the North Pole. But huge ice floes forced him to return to England. He reported seeing many whales in this northern area off Greenland, and the English and Dutch picked up on this and sent whaling vessels to harvest these monster whales. Well, again, in 1608, Hudson made another attempt to find a northern route, but again, the Hopewell was blocked with ice, and he had to again return to England. The Muscovy Company was so disappointed in these 2 failures, they discontinued any support of a further exploration by Henry Hudson. But in 1609, the Dutch East India Company hired Hudson to lead an expedition. The company gave him a ship, the Half Moon, and a crew of 18 men. Flying under the Dutch flag, he left Amsterdam and initially northeast, but his crew became unruly because severe cold. So he changed course for North America and sailed down the east coast. And after reaching all the way down to Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, he turned north and briefly explored Chesapeake Bay and the Delaware Bay. He traveled up along the New Jersey coast and traveled up to now what became known to us as the Hudson River and the present-day site of New York City. He traveled up the Hudson River for many months to a location near Albany, New York, as we know it today. The Netherlands faced claim to this area because he was flying under the Dutch flag. Remember now that he was an Englishman, and he was the captain of an English vessel for the first 2 voyages. But on this 3rd voyage, he took on the role and the responsibility for the Netherlands. He, on his way back down the Hudson River to the outlet to the Atlantic Ocean to go home, came into land many times with friendly Indians and resupplied the ship. He actually explored Long Island and Manhattan and all of the areas surrounding the Hudson River all the way up to Albany. So he reported back. When he came back to the Netherlands, he reported back how beautiful this land was and it could be easily cultivated. Unfortunately, the English got word of this, and they really were upset, and they sent him back to England to appear before the king. Boy, That's quite a deal, huh? To appear before the king. But he was scolded and admonished and was looked down upon for having done this. And England thought this land should be theirs. So in 1610, a new group of people in England decided that they were going to finance Mr. Hudson again with a ship called the Discovery. Hudson crossed the Atlantic, arrived just off the east coast of Labrador. From there, the Discovery reached a body of rough water we know today as, remember this now, Hudson Strait, which in turn led into Hudson Bay. He explored Hudson Bay and finally reached what he thought was the Pacific Ocean. He sailed south to what is now James Bay, but he failed to find an outlet at the southern end of James Bay. And ice forced him and his men to spend the winter there. This was the moment of tragedy and despair for Henry Hudson, for his crew mutinied, put him overboard in a small boat with his son and 8 other crew members. They were set adrift. Only God knows what happened to them. But I hope to think that maybe he did make it to land with those crew members and his son, and possibly was able to live out his life with friendly Indians in that area. So that's the story of Henry Hudson, an Englishman who went Dutch. Thank you.
Thanks to Henry Hudson, the Dutch came to America. They were fur traders, always looking for a way to make money, you know. They plied the Hudson River, established settlements, traded for fur pelts with the Indians. But the Dutch did not establish a colony until the 1620s. And it was named New Netherland. Their capital, New Amsterdam. It was a tiny little village with a fort. It consisted of only 15 streets at the very foot of the Isle of Manhattan. You know it today as downtown New York. Now in 1643, there were still very few people there, 500. But those 500 spoke 18 different languages. Very cosmopolitan right from the beginning. Well, 1643 was a fatal year. They had a cruel governor, William Kieft. And you know what he did? He taxed the Indians. He wanted to drive them out. Sounds like a politician to me. But it was worse than that. For the Indians got in a scrabble and killed 2 colonists. William Kieft retaliated and wiped out their village of over 100 people. Into the mix comes someone that you know from part 1. Anne Hutchinson. Remember her? She was excommunicated from the church at Boston. She was the friend of Edward Bates, our first immigrant ancestor. And she had migrated down to the Dutch colony with her children because she heard there was religious freedom there. But sadly to say, she became the victim of the retaliation of the Indians. And she and her children lost their lives. Now the colony continued to grow. It seemed in leaps and bounds, for many people came from Europe. And Of course, the English believed that the colony should be theirs, that the Dutch had no right to it, and so they were inching their way down from New England. At one point, the Dutch built a wall of logs, 12 feet high and 18 inches thick. It went from the East River to the Hudson, with a gate at Broadway, the old Indian pathway. But it wasn't to keep the Indians out. It was to keep the English out. And today you know what that is called. Wall Street. Well, they never did keep the English out. For in 1674, they finally gave in to the English. And that little town of New Amsterdam became the city of New York. Remember our French Huguenot ancestor, Burgard? Well, he came to New Amsterdam with his wife shortly before the English took over. Thank goodness the English didn't change anything. They let the Dutch live as they always had. Well, Burgon and his wife, Catherine Lefevre, they had a son named Isaac. He's the one that changed the name to Burgon, and he married a Dutch girl. Her first name was Heylie, and I'm not Dutch, so I can't pronounce it. Maybe you can. They had a son named John, who was of towering stature and great physical strength, and a worthy and kind neighbor. He married a Dutch girl, too. Jannet, Well, I'll leave it to you. Her last name was Stockholm. They had a son named Andrew, who married a Danish girl, so you have a little Danish in you as well. Her name was Neeltje. Well, they had a son named Abraham. Here he is. Finally have a picture. Abraham Burgon. He was in the War of 1812, and he was the first one to come to New Jersey from New York, and he settled in Newark in 1818. And he married a Dutch girl, too, with a very easy name, Sally Doremus. And together they had Sarah Elizabeth Burgon. How do you like that? And, of course, you know she married David Warner Crane. And they had Phoebe Crane, who married George Bates. And they had our grandpa, David Warner Bates. So there you go. Okay, you ready for some mental gymnastics? I hope so. Here is David Doremus, the grandfather of Sarah Burgon. The Doremuses came here early on as well, 1685 from Holland, and they had lots of wealth with them. And they purchased vast properties in Paterson, leading to the falls, and in Cedar Grove. And that money was passed down until it came to Hendrik Doremus, and it was his downfall. For during the Revolutionary War, he was a loyalist, for he did not want to part with his money. And, of course, he had to flee from the Patriots, and he fled to Staten Island and his land was taken from him by the revolutionists, and he never returned. But his son David, whom you see here in the picture, he came back as a lad of 16 to the city of Newark. He apprenticed himself to John Crane as a blacksmith, and he set up his own business after his apprenticeship was done, built his own house, began his own hardware and dry goods store. He even helped organize the first fire department of Newark. That's the industriousness of the Dutch. He married another Dutch gal, Sally Romer, and they had a daughter, Sally Romer Doremus, who married Abraham Bergaw. So we're right back to where I started you. Sally and Abraham gave birth to Sarah Elizabeth Bergaw, who married David W. Crane. Now, keep that straight in your heads. Thank you.
Hi everybody, let's talk about the Ings bloodline. And we're going to get involved with the Civil War that America so unfortunately went into. We have an ancestor who is the father of Ellen Ings, my grandmother. Her father was a drummer boy in the Civil War, and here is his photo now. And that was a horrific war. That was a war that none of us would ever want to see again. It was called a war of determination, where both sides were fully determined to win. And we lost about 700,000 Americans, more Americans than in any combined wars that have ever been fought by this country. What you just heard was a drum roll for Call to Battle by a drummer boy, and it probably was played many times over by our ancestor, William Eads. You know, most people think, when they think of the Civil War, they think of famous generals, or battles fought, or how the politics entered into an operation. But when I think of the war between the states, because of our ancestor, I now think a little differently. I think quite possibly the most important member of either side was the drummer boy. You know, when the federal government needed troops to answer the call, be it the North or the South, those troops never left home without a drummer as an integral part of their unit. Usually they were boys too young to do the actual fighting, but who knew the importance of a good drummer. Wow, what a thrill it must have been for a small boy who had probably never been further than a few miles from his hometown to march off to war with a company or regiment of home folk. I think it would be hard for any of us in this day to imagine a young boy, joining a fighting unit and going off to war. but almost every city, town, hamlet, or village that sent troops into this war had one or more of these brave young native sons. Much is written about the weapons and the strategies of the Civil War, but little has been said about the importance of the drummer. It was often thought that a drummer's only task was to beat cadence for his unit while marching. Well, that was only a small part of a day in the life of a drummer. Without a drummer to establish communication and keep order among the units in the field, many campaigns would have ended without success and even failure. The drummer had many responsibilities, including using one of many drum calls for everything from assembling officers for strategy meetings to sounding retreat in the midst of severe enemy fire. A drummer could always be seen near a high-ranking officer, because at any time he might be needed to alert the troops of an upcoming movement or operations. Because a drummer boy's job was the communicator for the unit, he often did not get enough sleep. At any time he might be needed to play the appropriate drum call. This meant being awakened at any hour and not being able to return to sleep for many hours thereafter. Once the men were assembled and deployed to a particular engagement, the drummers would lay down their drums and take up stretchers, act as runners between outposts, or do whatever was necessary to help the unit fight the battle. Many tales of heroism have been told about these young lads, and many lived to ripe old ages to tell generations of their contributions to this war effort. And now, let's take a look at a documentary movie that can explain much better than I how horrific this war was and how disastrous it was for families, children, and the soldiers who died willingly for their cause.
We were young and bound for glory, itching for a fight like you, bringing hell and purgatory to the boys who wore the blue. And I thought I'd seen it all, till the day night wouldn't fall. Oh, how the sun did blaze, wouldn't go down for days. I got shot and lost my rifle when the first wave hit the rise, and the guns rolled out like thunder, and the black smoke burned my eyes. And I watched it all unfold, just the way the Bible told. Joshua's enlisted, keeping the night at bay, and the soldiers kept a-coming till the ground looked like the sea of blue and gray. And I watched them from a distance, wondering if I would have fought or run away. The day the sun stood still, how they beat the bloody drums, and the seconds moved like hours, but the sunset never comes, and the cannons shake the ground, and the bullets test your will. Even shadows found no cover on that God-forsaken hill. The day the sun stood still.
Wow, what a horrific scene. that displayed to us how that war was so unbelievably terrible, and how lucky we are today. I'd like to review now the early settlers of the Eanes line. The Eanes came to us from England. They were English folk, came to Virginia. Unlike previous lines like the Bates and others, they landed in Virginia and developed one of the first colonies there in about 1700, 1714, that era. Edward Eanes was the first one we know about who made this venture. He was a frontiersman eventually, and then a tobacco farmer. In his early years, he picked a wife and was absolutely cast out of his family life by his mother and father because they did not approve of his choice. He had a son whose name was William Eanes, who was born before 1723 and died in 1783. He married a woman named Jane. They had a son who they named Edward Eanes, born in 1755, died in 1813. He became a well-to-do Virginia plantation owner near the Pocahontas State Park, matter of fact. He married a Nancy Ann Hill, who was the daughter of the somewhat famous Captain John Hill. They had a son named Thomas, who married a Martha Ann. Thomas migrated to Alabama and was a tailor. He died in the 1850s. And they had a son by the name of William Eanes, who is the primary person that we had been viewing, who is the father of Ellen Eanes Bates, my grandmother. William Eanes was born in 1844 in Alabama. He married Elizabeth Jenkins, who was an Irish immigrant. He died in 1884, only having lived 40 years. He was a drummer boy in the Civil War. And I myself remember my grandmother talking about the fact that she had his uniform. And I always wanted to see that uniform, but yet I failed to get to see it. And I never found anyone in the family that really knew its whereabouts. Well, Ellen Eanes, who was the daughter of William Eanes, married my grandfather, David Warner Bates, who you know well from part 1 of the Long Voyage. And of course, Ellen and David had 9 children. Ellen, Georgiana, Dorothy, Jenny, my mom, Elizabeth, Ruth, Phoebe, David, and Edith. And now, as we conclude the second part of the Long Voyage, we need for all of us to remember our heritage as an opportunity to look back and see the staunch scholars, the bravery, the determination, and the love that these people had. And we descend from all of these lines. We've talked about the Bates line, the Crane line, the Braga line, the Sayers line, the Doremus line, and the Eames line. And as Marian has stated, we have many, many grandfathers and grandmothers. So we can't go any further, and this probably will be the record that we need to pass on to our children and grandchildren. And hopefully we can all agree that this was a lesson of our own history. And now, as we conclude, I would like to present to you a short quiz. And those of you who would be participating in this quiz will have the opportunity to become our family historian.
My heart wants to beat like the wings of the bird that rise from the lake to the trees. My heart wants to sigh like a chime that flies from a church on a breeze. To laugh like